Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the 10th year anniversary story, The Three Doctors, written by Bob Baker and David Martin and directed by Lenny McEdam, I believe his name is, the dancer who also directed The Curse of Peladon. Now, it's a 4-part adventure, and yes, it's the 10th anniversary, though it wasn't actually aired around the time. It actually aired like right at the early of 1973, in January. And I've got this, and I've also got the novelisation by Terrance Dicks. It's a fantastic novelisation. My copy is a bit beaten up, as you can probably see. So I've got the novelisation and I've got the DVD of the televised story. I highly recommend both versions. I personally prefer the visual version, but the novelisation is really good. I've only read it once, but I remember great things about it. But anyway, this is a 4-part adventure, and it sees the Doctor, Jon Pertwee's Doctor, teaming up with Patrick Troughton's Doctor. And we also get scenes with William Hartnell returning to the role. And it is just so fantastic to see them play their roles. You might be disappointed to find out that William Hartnell is hardly in the story. But he is in it enough that I think the Three Doctor name is still valid. And the story also deals with Omega, the ancient person in the Time Lord Society who actually helped them create time travel by gaining the power they needed, by setting the sun to supernova and creating a black hole. However, Time Lords thought he was destroyed, and so he was like heralded as a great hero in Time Lord history. However, it turns out that he survived in a black hole and has gone mad. But yeah, so it introduces, and I think a lot of Darth Vader gets inspiration from Omega. He's a tragic character who was once good that turned evil, and his costume is vaguely similar. Not he's got like a gold and like a bluish shine to him, whilst Darth Vader's like a black costume, and Omega is a much more into his emotions. He gets angry really easily, which Darth Vader does in episode 4, but he doesn't really do that again, but I digress. So the story starts off with a device that scans like black holes in space. It has been landed onto somebody's farm, I believe it is, and something escapes from it, and whoever touches this thing gets teleported to the other side of the black hole. And Professor, I believe it's Professor Horace, or was Horace the guy? I can't remember. That's really bad, isn't it, to start off with? Basically, this guy's gone missing, and so the actual guy that invented this box goes to UNIT to try and find out what happened to this guy and how has he gone missing. But also as well, some of these figures on what the black hole actually is. Stuff is coming out of the black hole, and it makes no sense. It apparently has the speed faster than light, and it seems to be targeted right at Earth. And so the Dr. Joe, Benton, and the Brigadier basically investigate this. And for most of part 1, this is the story, as this blob thing is basically chasing the Doctor, and the Doctor's trying to work out what's going on. And the story is very good. It's a very interesting plot. And then when we get, and it keeps us entertained long enough that when the Doctor gets trapped in his TARDIS for the first time, we see Sergeant Benton and the Brigadier in the TARDIS. It's some of the greatest scenes. Now, the thing to note is that Lenny Maynard, when he did Curse of Peladon, he kept things very dark. It's very more an atmosphere. However, in this story, everything's really bright. You can see everything. And with this new TARDIS design, which is much more white and cleaner, but it's basically very similar to William Hartnell's and Patrick Troughton's one. It even brings back the old little television box that's on the ceiling, rather than using the hole in the TARDIS walls. Which is really strange that the Time Monster introduced a new TARDIS design and then it got they didn't reuse it. That was because some behind the scenes issues, and Barry Letts, the producer at the time, didn't like that design. So we had a much more faithful design here. Really cool. I personally really like it. But the point I want to get out here is that in this story, there's something about the backgrounds that makes all our main characters with their more colourful costumes just stand out a bit more, and especially this new TARDIS set. I really do prefer it. This is probably my favourite TARDIS design so far. It stands out, but it also lets our characters be the main focus. But I digress. And so the Doctor calls upon the Time Lords, and the Time Lords, they're like, right, we find out that the black hole is actually absorbing energy from the Doctor's home planet, which is not named yet. And the Time Lords basically don't have enough energy to save the Doctor, but perhaps he could save himself. And so they take a version of the Doctor from the past and plop him into the current situation. And so we get reintroduced, I should say, to Patrick Troughton as the second Doctor. Man, oh man, when he popped on screen, I didn't realise how much I missed him. His quirks, his demeanour, everything's there. It's like he never left the role. And the great scenes of the third Doctor and the second Doctor's bantering is some of the most iconic lines. I see you've done the TARDIS up a bit. I don't like it. What other ones? Have you seen my recorder? But my favourite bit is when they do the heads and tails, and the Doctor calls heads, and without the second Doctor even like letting the third one know, he goes, tough luck. So some great. This is probably the reason to buy the story. The banter between the third and second Doctor. Yes, it makes no sense because they're the same person, but there's just something about it that really it's just something really charming about this story. And the Time Lords basically see this and they're like, right, the Time Lords, the Doctor's effectiveness have actually halved, not doubled since the second Doctors came in. So let's introduce a third incarnation in terms of how many there are. So they bring in the first Doctor, who can only be seen through a screen. Originally, William Hartnell was actually supposed to be a bigger part in the story, but his wife requested that his role be shortened because he was very unwell at the time. So for his scenes, they had him on a screen just by himself, and where he could read his lines on cue cards. So yeah, but he gets some really great lines with the iconic, so you're my replacement, a dandy and a clown. Fantastic. And they basically discover that this thing is teleporting things to the black hole, and so the cliffhanger of the first episode is the third Doctor running out the TARDIS, and Joe follows him, and they get transported to Omega's world. And so the story has a back at the ranch storytelling with Unit and the second Doctor, and when the Brigadier gets reintroduced to the second Doctor, it is just Nicholas Briggs, Nicholas Courtney at his best. And then we have scenes with them, we have scenes on this planet, which is clearly a quarry, and they keep mentioning, this is, my opinion, one of the weaker parts of this story. The characters keep mentioning that it's really weird and bizarre. Joe Grant says it feels really weird, and they meet up with the scientist on there who was taken earlier in part 1. And he's doing some like mathematical equations, and he discovers that the light in this place is apparently backwards, but he can still see. Doesn't make any sense. But a lot of that comes from the dialogue, and you never really see anything to justify it. It just looks like a quarry, mainly because it is a quarry, and I know there's some budgets and stuff. And so we get some action scenes. Now, I want to talk about the villains of the story. I mean, Omega's the main villain, but he also has these henchmen. In the novel, they're called the Blob Men. I don't think they were ever named in the televised story. When I was a kid, when I was really young, before 2005, this used to be one of those stories I would watch constantly and all the time. Like, in fact, it is one of the most watched stories that I've got. It's one of those stories I just constantly can't stop watching. But one of my earliest memories, besides watching Tomb of the Cybermen, is me and my younger brother laughing our arses off at this story because of the henchmen. Now, the henchmen are these blobs. They basically look like giant orange bubble wrap with like crab claws. And they look really threatening for 1973 when they're standing still. But when they move, it's absolutely hilarious. They kind of like do like a penguin walk, joggling like this. It's absolutely hilarious. Fantastic. But that's one of my earliest memories. Watching this on one of those really old television sets, and me and my younger brother just laughing our asses off at that. So yeah, that's just something I remember. But back to the story. So the doctor then meets up with Omega and discovers what's happening, that Omega is alive, and he's gone a bit mad, and he's trying to get his revenge on the Time Lords for basically abandoning him. And there's a lot of parallels between Omega's story, how he was basically exiled. From his point of view, he was exiled on his planet, and even though he can basically control anything, basically the laws of reality don't apply here, only the law of Omega's will. But however, he's still exiled here, and he's gone basically mad. And it parallels the third Doctor story of him also being on exile. But he fights for good, and the Omega fights for himself. He fights for evil. And it's a great parallel. And the guy who plays Omega, whose name is on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember, I do apologise. What a fantastic role. You don't see his face. He's wearing a mask. It's basically like Darth Vader, only the guy who plays him is actually the voice as well. And something about that voice, man. That voice is so cool. I believe he also plays Azal in The Demons. I believe it's him. But anyway, I digress. That is just a fantastic role. And when he starts shouting and he's like, I am Omega! Fantastic. The cliffhanger for part 2 is the second Doctor talking with the first, and the first is like, you should go and help our current version, so drop the TARDIS defences and teleport yourselves onto the moon. And he does that. However, he takes the entire building, Unit HQ, into the black hole as well. And that's our cliffhanger. I used to think this bit was like really scary, how this creature could just take an entire building and take it into a black hole, into Omega's universe. But rewatching it, I found that scene absolutely hilarious. The shot of the black hole in the building, like going into it, absolutely hilarious. So then, episode 3 has the second Doctor, in Omega's world, and so they try to meet up with Omega, and when Omega discovers that the Doctor is there, he gets really angry, really pissed, and it's just some great writing here, man. It's just a really great writing, as Omega's basically mad. So when he sees the second Doctor, he basically feels like he's betrayed, and we then slowly start to learn what Omega's plan is. Basically, he discovered that he can't escape from this world, because as soon as he attempts to leave, the world starts deteriorating and it'll stop existing if he leaves. But he can't basically leave, because otherwise he would basically write himself out of existence and die, presumably. And so what his plan is to get the Doctor in control, so it'd be with the Doctor's universe, so Omega could escape and live out his world out of exile, and maybe on the Doctor's home planet. Who knows? And the Doctor does attempt to help him at one point. However, they discover that the costume that Omega's wearing is to stop the erosion, because he is matter, and they're now in a universe of antimatter, which should not physically be together. Either a giant explosion or one cancels out each other. And so when the Doctor's trying to take off his costume so that they can help him, it turns out there's nothing behind the costume. The erosion has happened, and the only thing that survives of Omega is Omega's will. And we get a great shot of Omega holding his helmet up, and his face is not there, and you can see the Doctor's behind his head. Really great shot. And he gets really pissed at this, and so he just basically plans to destroy everything. But the Doctor basically challenges him, and so we get a plan. We get a strange fight scene, basically like a mental battle, and the way it's shot is you got John Pertwee being our Doctor, and Omega's dark side, which comes off as some sort of vampire goblin thing, fighting in just a black void. It's very strange, but and it's in slow motion as well for some reason. But yeah. Now, an interesting thing to note, or at least I think it's interesting, and maybe nobody really cares. Whilst this is going on, there's a scene with the first Doctor talking to the Time Lords, and they explain that they're going to send him through the black hole to try and talk to the Doctors, to get some information. And so it disappears off the screen. And then we cut back to the fight, and you see Omega strangling the Doctor, and Omega's fantastic voice screaming out, "Destroy him!" And that's our cliffhanger. Now, the reason I brought up the first Doctor scene is what I find pretty interesting. I don't know if anyone else has picked this up, or is it just me overthinking it? The first cliffhanger is the third Doctor going into the black hole. The second cliffhanger is the second Doctor going into the black hole. And the third cliffhanger, though we don't actually see it, is around the time of the first Doctor going into the black hole. So the cliffhangers all meet up with the Doctors going into the black hole. I find that really interesting. I don't know, I just thought this was something fun to note. And so the Doctor then escapes, and they meet up with UNIT and they go into the TARDIS. Now, throughout the story, the second Doctor has been complaining about his recorder and how he wants to play it, but everybody basically tells him to shut up. And we get some scenes in the TARDIS and trying to get out to the black hole. And the second Doctor basically finds the recorder in a device that keeps things in it matter, not antimatter. So it wasn't converted like everyone else. And so they plan to use this device to destroy Omega. So they go to the Omega's fortress, and they say, right, you can have your freedom. They basically trick him. But first send all of our friends back, and Omega does so. And we get a really sad scene of all of our characters that we meet up throughout the story. Basically saying goodbye to the Doctor, thinking it could be his last moments. It's a very touching scene. It is kind of anticlimactic because it doesn't turn out to be their final scene. But it is a very great moment, and I love when Jo decides to stick with the Doctor, and she says something like, I want to stay here, but the Brigadier and the Doctor are like, no, you gotta go. Don't be afraid, it'll take you back home. And so we get it in a scene when that's all done, and the Doctor tries to trick him into hitting it. Now, this bit I thought was really odd, but now thinking back, I thought it's very clever, because you get the second Doctor holding the device, and just before he thinks that Omega's going to take it, the Doctor and the Doctor do like a mind transfer, and you think that's part of a plan, and you think that maybe the second Doctor maybe played it too far, but Omega actually hits it out of his hand in anger, which was actually the plan overall, and which caused a colossal explosion destroying Omega, or so we thought. And that's one of the things. The second Doctor is visually a buffoon, but secretly he's got all the plans. He knows what he's doing, and this story, I am glad to say, shows the second Doctor's strengths. And there you go. All the Doctors say goodbye, and we get a scene at the end of the Doctor having his Time Lord information returned to him and a new dematerialization circuit. His exile is over. He can now be free to go anywhere in the TARDIS. Basically ending not just an era of the third Doctor era, but in the first 10 years as An Earthly Child is him basically on exile because he ran away from the Time Lords. And then when the start of the third Doctor era has him basically actually exiled by the Time Lords onto Earth. So, yeah, very fitting ending for a 10-year anniversary. However, the Doctor does state that he doesn't plan on going anywhere soon. He still needs to do some bits and bops in the TARDIS. But this is the start of slowly phasing out the UNIT in Doctor Who, which I think was maybe a bad decision, maybe. I like that when the Doctor does turn to Earth, he has a group, a place to call his own. But it does mean that modern day stories can go a little bit more anywhere than early third Doctor stories. So there you go, that's the Three Doctors. It is one of my personal favourite stories. It's highly up there, and it's one of the stories I've watched the most. So the Three Doctors, fantastic. So that's the Three Doctors. So join me next time where we take a break from TV and we read some comic books. which I haven't actually read, so I can't tell you anything yet. So join me next time for The Herald of Destruction. See you then on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!